Welcome to O'Hara. It's time to explore the depths of your mind, your sanity, and your fear. I hope you're sitting comfortably. Enjoy. Frankenstein, Part 1. At long last, I have unlocked the mysteries of life. Tonight, I am become a god. The closed eyes could be seen through the narrow opening in the bandages upon the creature's face. The eyelids were sealed by a thin layer of mucus and other unknown fluids. Electricity pulsed through its mangled body, and the once lifeless abomination opened its soulless eyes. The boat coasted along the waves, icy water escaping the depths and splashing on the deck. Robert Walton looked out into the wasteland around them. Ice, and water again, nothingness for miles save the occasional sheet of white posing as a landmass. Mr. Walton, you'll freeze to death if you stay out here for too long. My bosun, don't you worry. I'm actually quite accustomed to voyages through the northern waters. I'm very well aware you've been training for this expedition for months, going out with whale fishers and all that. Yes, well, it has been a dream of mine ever since my early years. Finally, an expedition to the North Pole. That's why I hired you and your skilled sailors. But, is there land at the North Pole? A sailor told me there's naught but frost and desolation, no matter how far you go. The two gazed off into the distance, searching for landmarks, structures, anything that might indicate something other than nothingness. Aye, some explorers do indeed say that, but others are of a sort of different opinion. They say that if you keep going through the ice, you'll eventually meet a land of wonders and beauty, and a land yet unseen. I am of that belief. And I suppose I'll be the first to discover it. Just thinking of it makes my concern over the risk of the sea voyage vanish. Bosun looked at Walton, concerned at his lack of fear and consideration of safety. But Bosun, I am indeed occasionally overcome by an insatiable anxiety. At such times I think how nice it would be to have a friend who I could sympathise with. The two talked a while longer. Then the ship was struck by a thicker portion of ice ahead, struggling to push through the difficult terrain. Damn it! We'll be crushed by the ice if this keeps up. Stop the ship! The deckhands quickly worked on lowering the sails and adjusting course so that the ship could come to a steady stop. The fog had begun to creep in also, making visibility far more troublesome, not that there was much to see in the first place. This is some luck. How long might we have to sail like this, Bosun? Well, if our luck is poor, perhaps forever. Walton didn't seem overly excited by the proposition of an eternity in ice. Wait, what on earth is that? He pointed out onto the ice. There! What is it? Do you see it over there on top of the ice? The crew rushed to the side of the ship, the structure swaying slightly from the weight. As Walton had said, there certainly was something on the ice. The fog made it hard to discern details, but the general shape was clear. A sledge with a long line of canines tugging on the reins. The figure in the sled cracked the whip fiercely as the sled slowly pulled from one side of the horizon to the other. Why would a sledge be all the way out here? It's hundreds of miles away from civilization. And the man driving it, he's gigantic. He must be 8 foot tall. He was right. The driver was facing away from the ship, but it was clear they were large and towering, perhaps the reason for having twice as many dogs to pull such weight. They watched as the sledge pulled further and further until finally it was completely out of sight. The crew remained stuck all the way through nightfall. Walton entered his quarters below the deck, a modest room considering the size and state of the ship, but He was less concerned with the conditions of himself and more with the nature and origin of the Iceman. He pondered the reasons why someone would be on the ice, writing notes and a brief description of the man. Oh yes, ice must be breaking. Lovely, well, if things go well, he'll be off again tomorrow. He returned to the surface the next day to see the progress, but saw the crew that was once again crowded around the side of the ship. What's going on? Captain, have a look at this. He pointed down off the edge of the ship. Below, on a small piece of ice that had broken off from the larger sections, was a man, slumped over, with a similar sledge and a dog lying sheepishly on the reins. We won't hear a word of it, so if you get on the ship, you'll freeze to death in 2 or 3 hours like that. He appeared unresponsive, but certainly alive. He was also a lot smaller than the man from before, skinny and malnourished. His clothes hung loosely to his skin, and his cheekbones were sunken like a carcass. He's different from the one yesterday. Must have gotten stuck on that chunk and broken off and floated away. We can't allow you to perish in the open sea. The man looked up, staring at the crew from behind his brow. This ship, where is it bound? You are currently heading to the North Pole. You are? Well, I suppose in that case I will accept your invitation. They lowered a rope and the man plus his dog were hoisted aboard. The dog was fed leftover scraps of meat that could be spared, while the man was taken to a lower deck with an open fire. They wrapped him in several blankets and garments and left him to rest. The whole time Walton stayed at his side, watching over him, not with concern but with curiosity. He awoke and calmly opened and carefully opened his eyes. He gazed to his side, seeing Walton's eyes meet his. Oh, thank goodness you're finally awake. You've been asleep 2 days now. Seems our journey has been quite difficult. You're emaciated. I thought you might actually die. The man sat up, his skeletal figure even more present up close. It's the ship headed towards the North Pole. Don't move so suddenly. But yes, we are making steady progress now. You did surprise us, though. If the ship had been on its way home, did you intend to remain there upon the ice in your condition? Of course. Better to die there than return home in disgrace. Are you saying that you have something to accomplish at the North Pole, even if it means your own death? I seek the one who fled from me, that base demon. His eyes were glassy and unwavering. Seemed to have been out on the ice for quite some time. Walton collected some more firewood and fed it to the fire carefully. Would the man who pursued you happen to be a person of enormous stature, and did he travel in the same fashion by a sledge? How would you know that? It's just as I thought. I fancy we've seen him. For the day we picked you up, we saw some dogs drawing a sledge across the ice. A day ahead of me. Walton crouched down before the man, who seemed more agitated than before. Did something happen between you two and that large man? No, it would be rude to trouble you for the details, but... Oh, I still haven't asked your name. What are you called? The man cleared his throat and said with some reservation. My name is Victor. Victor Frankenstein. The expedition, even with the setback, was going well. The boat continued due north at a reasonable pace, and there didn't appear to be any other obstructions ahead. Victor was up on the deck, using a spyglass to scan the surroundings for a sign of his target. Mr. Frankenstein, you mustn't push yourself. If we encounter your man, I shall inform you at once. Thank you, but I will not die so easily. You are rather haggard, yet your eyes shine so brightly. No doubt you're a wonderful man. No matter the unparalleled misfortunes one might suffer, the eyes alone reveal one's true nature. There was no sight of the man throughout the day. The crew retired to the lower deck as night came, and Walton once again joined Victor as he slept. He spoke, despite Victor lying with his eyes firmly shut. When I think about it, although we met by happenstance, in an unexpected place, don't you think it rather curious fate, Mr. Frankenstein? that although our individual aims are different, we are both risking our lives seeking the North Pole. I'm wagering my life on this expedition. I'm certain I shall make discoveries if I can simply reach the pole. Perhaps solve the mysteries of nature, the sources of God's power, in particular, the wondrous power that attracts the needle. Yes, indeed, the mystery of magnetism. Unravelling that is my greatest objective. Ascertaining the secret of magnetism, I've no doubt, is the power that rules the world. Victor awoke. How can it be? What is it? Are you feeling poorly? Are you just about to err as I did back then? Err? What do you mean? Why would an expedition to further human knowledge be an error? Victor remained lying down and closed his eyes as he spoke. You seek knowledge and wisdom as I once did. It's only natural for a man to pursue knowledge until a few years ago I burned with the same passion as you, but the result of that is this man you see before you now. He did not speak for a moment, then opened his eyes once more and sat upright. Captain Walton, I shall share with you my disastrous history. Because of my mistakes, I lost the people I loved the most. I imagine that you may deduce an apt moral from my tale. He leaned in closely to Walton. All right, Captain. Listen closely to how great my ambition was and how I lost everything. My childhood was a happy one in every possible way. I lived with my parents in the beautiful Genovese countryside, wanting for nothing. When I was 5, my mother took in an orphan from Italy. She filled my heart with so much joy. Her name was Elizabeth. We were so young and so innocent when we met. She understood me so well, and I adored her. We would sit by the river and play games and spend much of our time together, along with my friend Henry Kerrville. He often would ask us to play knights, and though still a child, I developed a passion for natural philosophy. At an inn by the bath near Thonen, I perused the bookshelves wherever I could. I would bring books of philosophy I found interesting to my father, but he told me to stop, saying that the works were sad and trashy. But I couldn't stop. I became utterly obsessed with these books. I dreamed of discovering the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. Our family was sat around the dinner table one night. I was seated at the head of the table with my mother on the other end. I suppose it was when I was 15. And then a bolt of lightning struck the oak in the garden. Elizabeth and I jumped at the sound, and my mother was visibly concerned. We watched the large wooden structure out the windows burning in the night. My father and his guest continued speaking. My father once again insisting that my readings of philosophy were archaic. The idea of alchemy was wrong, and he wanted me to be brought into the modern age. So the guest spoke of Mr. Galvani's discovery.
It's been taking everyone by surprise these days. He placed a charged metal scalpel on the sciatic nerve of a dead frog and thus made the leg muscles twitch. From this fact, he hypothesized the existence of animal electricity. In fact, in his later works, it is actually seen.
I went out to inspect the oak the following day. Its general shape remained, but the trunk was split into 2 parts, branching out in different directions. I supposed that I had been wasting my time and said goodbye to those ancient desires of mine. I'd had feelings like that several times before, and each time I tried avoiding it, but...
Congratulations, Victor. I wanted to go with you to university, but my father, he just wouldn't allow it in the end. I'm not giving up, of course, but I will have to persuade him. I've no intention of becoming a merchant, incidentally. I've heard your mother was sick.
Is she well again now? This was my good friend Henry at the time. He was bold and a good friend of mine. I told him that she was still confined to bed and that Elizabeth and Justine, the new maid that had recently arrived at the house, were taking care of her. Justine was young at the time, but did very good work, and she cared very warmly for Mother. My whole family adored her.
Master Victor!
She came running from the house.
Master Victor, please hurry. It's your mother. Her condition is all of a sudden, it's...
Before she could finish, we rushed towards the house and up to the bedroom. There was raspy breathing coming from inside, and we entered and saw the family crowded around the bedside. My mother wheezing and struggling to breathe.
Look after the children. Justine, I'm so grateful to you. Stay with this family. Take good care of my youngest William, especially. And Victor, Elizabeth. I do hope the two of you will be wed. That would be best.
It was a great sadness to see my mother die, made worse still by seeing the toll it had on my family. Elizabeth cried for days, and although William was young, he understood all too well. A few weeks after my mother passed, I set out alone to Ingolstadt. I took a carriage and said my goodbyes to the family and to Henry. I suppose it was a meeting with my Professor Waldman that settled my fate. The lecture hall was vast and contained the minds and motivations that drive an entire revolution. Professor Waldman stood at the front and spoke with great gusto and enthusiasm to the brilliant minds that lay before him.
Reflect upon the history of chemistry compared to the field's former glory. Some of you might feel that it has slid into irrelevance, but you could be wrong. In fact, it is the opposite. The ancient teachers of science promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They cannot transmute metals nor create the elixir of life. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show her hidden workings.
I was rather captivated and chose to speak with the professor after the lecture. Professor, you might laugh at this, but as a boy I believed in Agrippa and Paracelsus. But when I learned that their work was obsolete, it nearly served to destroy me.
Oh, no. I'm certainly not trying to imply that modern philosophers must hold their predecessors in disdain. These are the men whose insatiable desire and zeal we are indebted to for most of the foundations of our knowledge. Should you accomplish some great work in the future, I wouldn't be surprised in the least if the driving force behind it was your studies as a boy. I can see you have great promise, Frankenstein. Chemistry is but one branch of natural philosophy after all. If you are willing to put in the work, I shall not spare any effort in assisting you. If there are any apparatus with which you used to use, simply say the word.
And so, the ambition blossomed within me. I felt as though I could do something that no one else had managed before. And it, no doubt, would have been stepping into the territory of a god. Something flashed in the back of my mind. It would lead to my downfall. My studies, they grew ardent and eager after that. My proficiency was the astonishment of the masters, but I continually sought an attainment of one object of pursuit, and was solely wrapped up in this. Eventually, my residence at university was no longer conducive to my studies. I needed a further independent research, and the place I need for that is a cemetery. I went out late into the night with nothing but my bag and an unlit candle to light the way when I entered the crypt. The cemetery was close to the university, so it would make transportation quick and easy. I entered the crypt which housed the unburied caskets, and I prized open the closest. Inside was a decaying face staring up at me. The corpse of a man just deceased. It was fresh enough, at least, to be partially useful, I suppose. I visited the tombs every night to investigate the process of physical decomposition. And then, one night, I finally understood.
It is so simple. Oh, dear Lord, tonight I stand alongside you. I have finally discovered the secret of a life.
I made a request with my landlady to move to the room farthest on the back at the top floor. She thought it was a strange request to move to such an inconvenient place, but she allowed it. In order to continue my research, I needed somewhere I could work away from prying eyes. The room was large enough and empty, but perfect for my needs. I spent some time working there, and at some point I had a discussion with the professor.
Frankenstein, you haven't looked very well lately, and you seem to have lost a little weight. Perhaps you're throwing yourself too passionately into your studies.
No, Professor, no need to worry. Incidentally, what's happening now with Galvani's theory of animal electricity?
Well, the arguments for and against are still ongoing, but from my own investigation, the legs of the frog move not due to the electricity within the body, but rather a simple trick brought about by the metal.
Most likely Galvani's theory is destined to be superseded soon enough. Is that so? Well, Professor, I do believe the theory is of real significance. Essentially, not whether or not the details are correct, but what can be extrapolated from it. He seemed puzzled by this proposition, and we said our goodbyes. My escapades in the crypt continued more frivolously after that. Grave after grave, corpse after corpse. One time I had gotten slightly careless and made quite a racket and attracted the groundsman. I heard mumbling from above and quickly rushed to my feet, leaving the corpses as they were. As he entered the door and cried, "Who's there?" I made my escape, dashing past him up the stairs and out into the night. He must have thought I was a monster out of vampires. I was covered in blood and looked half dead from lack of sleep. I didn't have much time to move back the coffins or bodies, so the sight below was rather gruesome to say the slightest. Because of my aggressive methods, shall we say, I was becoming rather overworked and troubled in the mind. The thing keeping me sane was my journal, writing notes and findings that I hoped would one day be published in a paper, and noted things that were important to the study and my goal.
It is easier to progress with the work when the body is larger. Having gathered all the materials and the height, it will be about 8 feet. I have no choice but to use animal organs in place of those I was simply unable to attain. Nor can I use a pre-existing brain. I shall have to create one from nothing. Now that I know the secret of life, such a feat may actually be possible. But once I began work, it was not as simple as I expected. The brain, you see, it's tricky. It's a complex organ that requires a fine hand and precision at every turn. I destroyed many in frustration. Countless times, the room itself was starting to look like a failed butcher's. I was determined, though. I worked and crafted to near perfection. The body was sewn together on the floor, comprising of no less than 20 subjects. I stitched and wrapped, and the end result looking like some amalgamation between a mummified corpse and a giant statue. I carefully situated the eyes in the skull, the lack of eyelids making them protrude and glare at me at every step. It was rather unsettling to be watched, but I kept on. Finally, it was finished, and I had completed it.
The ideal human being. Isn't it a little too large, perhaps? No. A prototype is oft oversized. Prototype? Not at all. This is the ultimate creation. Behold its physical beauty. Physical beauty? This twisted lump of flesh. I decided it was time to give life to the corpse. I connected vials of solution I prepared and surrounded the creature in electrical wire. It was a crude setup, but it was the best I could do given the circumstance. I loosened the valves in the containers to allow the liquid to flow into the carcass and flicked the switch. Electricity began to course all through the body. Wave upon wave of voltage, it continued to pulse, and I began to see twitches, convulsions. I assumed those were just responses of a material to a voltage, but it became more and more natural. It writhed and squirmed till eventually the electricity stopped and the vials had been drained. The creature tugged and spasmed, pulling away from the cords and wires that were restraining it. I drew back in horror, watching as it rose to its feet, towering over me by several feet. Its limbs clicked, its joints were out of their sockets, but it stood. I stared, horrified, at my creation. I had actually done it, created life from nothing. It was facing away from me at first, slightly, but then it turned its head to meet mine. Its slack jaw hung low, liquid drooling from its lips and onto the wooden floor. Its stare was piercing, and that's all it did. Stare. But then it moved towards me. I fell backwards. Even in its hunched state, it was still difficult to meet its eyes by straining my neck. And then its hand lifted and it reached out for me, groaning, moving closer, staring, shuffling, moving closer. Victor. You. Henry. Victor, you were having a nightmare. This is your room. What are you doing here? I finally got permission to attend university. I arrived early yesterday morning. The rain had just lifted. I got quite the surprise upon arriving at your apartment. You were soaking wet and lying in the middle of the street. They quickly carried you to a room and you slept the whole day. A whole day? Yes. How ill are you? What's the cause of all this? I rushed out of bed and ran to the door. I ran down the corridor and to the room that had left the creature in, fearing the worst. Victor! Henry, did you go into this room? I did. The door was open. Should I not have? So you did. Did you see anything? Well, it's quite the state in there. What kinds of experiments have you been doing in there exactly? There are instruments scattered everywhere. And animal bloods coating everything. Then there was nothing there? I pulled back the door and, still unsure if Henry was telling the truth, but he was right. Nothing. Just the way it was before. Aside from the shattered containers and wires that lay on the ground, where there used to be a corpse. I assumed it had just ran off. I had been unable to endure the disgusting nature of the monster I created in that room that night, so I must have ran outside and then apparently lost consciousness on the street in front. The monster must have wandered off after me in the night. Victor, what's wrong? Did something happen? All I could do was laugh. I had created life in a matter of moments and lost it. I said it was nothing, but... Victor, you have a terrible fever. Are you all right? I collapsed in the hallway and was confined to bed for more than 6 months. Gave me a lot of time to think and to consider what to do next. That monster. He has to have been dead. It would have been possible for such a repulsive creature to live long. He might be dead, but at least I was successful. I might have lost my creation, but thanks to the devoted care of my good friend Henry, I gradually recovered and soon forgot all about that terrible night. That's all for now. Our tale will continue next time.